Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Free Thought Blog's Podish-Sortacast, in which we try to pretend we have some idea of how to make a podcast work. Can everybody hear me all right for a start? Okay, I think that's a yes from everyone. Good. So get comfortable, everyone, and we will begin. I'm Dr. Sarah of Geeky Humanist blog on Free Thought Blogs, and sadly, I'm having to host tonight because nobody else wants to do it, and our usual talented hostess is sadly not available. So you're stuck with me. So might I introduce H.J. Hornbeck, of the blog Reprobate Justice, if I'm remembering correctly.
Reprobate spreadsheet, but close.
Lovely.
Reprobate spreadsheet. Yes.
Reprobate spreadsheet. I do apologise. There you go. This sort of thing is why I probably should not be hostess. Paul Z. Myers of the blog Pharyngula, if I've pronounced that correctly, which I might not have.
You did. You got it exactly right.
There you go. Getting
That's
something
why you
right.
should be hosting this more often.
You even said Z instead of Z.
Great American Satan. Yes, I Americanized it despite bringing this to you from Britain, and we have we're supposed to have Great American Satan. Something it's having some kind of identity crisis. His camera keeps changing. Sorry, I didn't check the pronouns. Great American Satan, are you comfortable with he pronouns?
Sometimes.
Okay, shout me if you're not. And possibly also making a guest appearance, the cat Hecubus might or might not choose to turn up. And our topic tonight is problematic faves. Now, earlier today, I mentioned this to two different people, that this was going to be our topic, and interestingly, both of them immediately jumped to the conclusion that problematic faves refers to, for example, when you have a favourite child and you're not supposed to. If anyone wants to talk about having a favourite child, go right ahead. I am not admitting to such a thing on camera, but I believe it actually is referring to the situation when you happen to like a particular book, film, piece of music, whatever, with something in it that is really bloody dubious, the kind of thing that makes you think, oh my God. So anyone want to kick off by talking about their problematic faves?
I mean, if you want, I could start off.
It
was, after all, the first one called out, so, you know. Plus, I come bearing props. Just to show this really is a favorite of mine, I actually have books. I, as you can imagine, being a computer scientist and all that, really sort of love The Expanse, seasons and all that. I still have to catch up on season 6. I didn't actually manage to see all of season 5. It was awesome. And I think I skipped out some of the earlier seasons and all that too. It is definitely a favorite of mine. I love it a lot. Obviously, I bought a fair number of the books, so that qualifies. That doesn't mean it's not problematic in some ways, though. And I can think of 2 ways in particular it kind of is. Let's go with the least objectionable first. One way that it's kind of problematic in that it presents itself as if it was hard sci-fi, when in fact it's much more on the soft sci-fi kind of things. Like Star Wars, for instance, is a classic example of soft sci-fi. They make shit up all the time. The Force makes absolutely no sense from a physical point of view. Nobody cares. It's actually just sort of a space western about the Vietnam War. That's really all you need to know about it. Hard science fiction, probably the best example of that is The Martian. There's basically 2 major cheats within that, one of which the author didn't even know about before publication. And the one major cheat the author did, this is sort of the weather on Mars essentially being nothing like what is presented in the book. The author is very much like, yeah, I wanted to kick it off that way because this is a man versus nature story. I wanted nature to come along and just screw things over. It makes no sense, but thematically it fits perfectly. That's okay. That, if you want to go with hard sci-fi, that's cool. And The Expanse sort of does that. A lot of, when it comes to actually how people get around, people have actually done, orbital calculations and all that. There's entire scenes where people are like trying to figure out orbital calculations. There's one scene early on in particular where people are actually sort of trying to figure out how exactly an asteroid moved in a specific way. I'm trying not to go into too many spoilers, especially since I don't know if you noticed it, but these are books 7, 8, and 9 that I've got here. They have not been adapted to TV yet. I think the earlier books are probably fine to be spoilered on, but 7, 8, and 9, there are some people who may not have sort of encountered it yet, so I'll avoid it, even though they were just published. But yes, it presents itself as being fairly hard sci-fi, but in the last trio of books, this is hinted at in the earlier stuff, but it becomes more problematic towards the end, is there's a fair bit of panpsychism all throughout it. The idea is not simply that we have this advanced alien tech, which can do all sorts of things to orbital paths and all that, and can apparently, defy a fair number of laws of physics in many ways. But it's also able to actually communicate with people's thoughts and minds and do things. And there's just really no evidence that's the case. People have been looking for, I think, a good 4 decades or so now. The earliest example and most famous I can think would be Penrose, of like quantum mechanical weird stuff happening with cognition, and it's just not there. Everything we know about cognition suggests it can be explained by classical mechanics. There's nothing sort of special or beyond with that. And so to actually come along and say, well, yes, they've got advanced physics, and this allows them to come along and change, human minds and consciousness and all that, makes absolutely no sense. It's a cheat that's a bit too far. Even though the alien race themselves is kind of, wavering a little bit into soft sci-fi, I definitely think that one crosses the line. And it sort of changes it from, something at least that's hard sci-fi to fairly soft in that regard. And it was one of the more disappointing things I had in the finale, the final 3 books. The other problem I've got with it. Oh, sorry, you had something to say, sir?
Oh, so I was basically just clarifying. So you feel the problematic aspect is that the science doesn't really hold up?
Well, the problem is more that the book presents itself as a fairly hard sci-fi, as in we're trying to be, strong about the physics. But there's no way the panpsychism that actually is fairly cornerstone to the plots, especially later on, make any sense. You just can't do that physically. And I refer you, if you doubt me, to a lecture by Sean Carroll on the limits of what new things we can actually discover within physics. He makes a fairly cogent point that we haven't discovered anything new, and anything new we would discover is not going to interact with us strongly. So the whole scenario of being able to fiddle with people's minds in any way, shape, or form is just, it doesn't work. All right, that was one.
So it's a book that presents itself as all working within science, and yet in a way where it could not actually do so.
Yeah,
Which I will agree is the kind of thing that annoys the hell out of me. So yes. On a tangent, because I am now madly curious, although I realise it isn't what you're talking about. I believe you mentioned one cheat in the Martian, and you said there are 2. What was the other one, or did I miss it?
well, there is a crucial scene within there in The Martian where there's no coincidence actually that the person left behind on Mars is a botanist, because at some point he has to raise food for himself using nothing what he's got with there for supplies, and it's presumed he's got a fair amount of water and all that, but he actually uses the Martian soil to grow things. Now plants are actually pretty tolerant into what they're growing for the most part, as long as there's nothing poisonous in there. You can grow them even like little clay things and all that. They need water, they need nutrition. That's great. We can hand wave those 2 away very easily, even in a hard sci-fi setting. After the book was published, though, some NASA, research on it did some extensive soil analysis. I forget which of the rovers it was, and found a ton of perchlorate within the lunar soil itself. That's poisonous, so you can't just grow plants directly in it.
Basically, the author wrote all this stuff in good faith, and damn those scientists, they had to go and discover something that meant it wouldn't work. Don't you just hate it when they do that?
Now, those damn party pooper scientists.
Now, wait a minute though. I'm just going to reject wholesale the idea that The Martian is hard science. It's terrible. I found it
You're
unreadable.
ruining this. You are ruining this. I did not go into this evening expecting to have the Martian ruined
Oh,
for me. Okay, go
oh,
on. What's
yeah,
terrible
no, it
about
was
it?
even if he didn't know about perchlorates, the whole idea that you can reconstitute a viable soil substitute just by pooping into a bunch of sterile dirt with who knows what in it. Nah, I just don't buy it. I don't believe a word of it. And then of course the whole thing about I forget how long he survived there, but he survived on just potatoes.
Well, he had
Yeah, about a
vitamin
year.
tablets as well, according to
Yes,
the.
if you can.
Sorry?
Yeah, that then also throughout the book there are these convenient coincidences. Everything works out for him right on time. He has a problem. Oh, presto, he's got a fix. It got really annoying after a while. So no, I
Oh,
did.
I'm going to argue in favour of allowing that, since you do get a certain amount of license in writing these things. The problems have to be solved, otherwise you're basically going to have the hero dying out on page 10 and then a lot of blank pages at the end of the book. And I did feel it was all done well in terms of him not knowing what the hell he was going to do about something, and then working out something insanely dangerous that he could do that he might just about make work, and with a lot of trouble, etc., etc., and bruises and cracks and so on, kind of making it work and just managing to survive long enough. I mean, I felt that aspect of the story I will actually go along with. Yes, I
I
feel
could
the right
see it.
balance was struck.
Yeah, once or twice you can get away with that. But the whole book is cobbled together about a series of fortunate accidents that get him off of Mars. Right up to the very end when he manages to fly his ship up and properly coordinate and go into orbit and dock with another ship.
It was at least better with the film. Spoilers here, but I did get extremely annoyed that the film chose to have him doing the Iron Man thing, flying around with a punctured glove. No, 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 no. Just
Okay.
that was just wrong.
Yeah.
Also, I feel we're getting off topic. I realise this was my fault. Once again, this is why I should not be hostess. Sorry, HJ, I think you're actually going to talk about the topic a bit more, so please fire ahead.
Okay, well, I'm also checking the time too, and I'm still within limits, so yeah. The other complaint I've got with it
Hmm.
is that it completely erases any sort of non-binariness within human beings as well too. Um, if you actually read through the book itself, there's a lot of variation of sexuality represented. One of the lead characters, for instance, is bi. It's fairly strongly hinted at within the text itself. You mentioned you encounter lesbian relationships, you encounter polycules in space. It's really quite progressive in that regard. But there are no trans people. There's not a single person you meet in there which is trans. Now, the authors have actually defended that. I think someone actually asked them on Twitter, like, hey, what's up with this? Why are there no trans people within space and all that? And their answer was, well, there are trans people all over the place. The thing is, medical science has advanced so much, nobody gives a shit anymore. This is, after all, a future where we do have the ability to grow limbs, at least slowly and all that. And we've got sort of a poor version of the medevac, which shows up in so much conspiracy stuff, where all your things get sort of healed and all that. They do have sort of a medical bed, which can do a decent amount of surgeries and all that. It's entirely fitting and plausible that someone who does not think their body conforms with their sex can get that fixed well before that. And we can also imagine that most of society is perfectly tolerant with that. Perfectly fine. The problem is, though, is this sort of gets into Dumbledore is gay territory and all that, where it really sort of smells like the authors hand-waving after the fact, rather than actually incorporating into the story itself. Like, you don't just sort of flip a switch like this and all transphobia disappears within 150 years, anti-Semitism has been with us for 2 millennia. it's not like suddenly within 50 years of developing this medical technology, everybody's going to be cool with people being transgender. I don't see transphobia disappearing that quickly. On top of that, there are people who aren't transgender. There are non-binary people out there who would not present in a typically masculine or feminine way. Especially with this medical technology, I'm sure there would be a ton of body modifications, which would really sort of challenge people's idea of gender and sex and allow you to do all sorts of wild things with yourself, with how you express yourself. None of that in the book whatsoever. So it really sort of smells to me as a sort of an ad hoc justification for something they forgot about, and not happy with that. It's one thing they really should have incorporated.
When were the books written?
I think the earliest ones are about 2005, approximately. It's just a rough estimate off the top of my head. But
from what I can recall, transgender issues were not particularly a hot topic in the media at the time. So I feel like, they've given their in-story justification, but I think this is a pretty clear case of out-story justification. It never occurred to them. And I think this is going to be like the way we look back on things and think, actually, it would be great if, for example, we included more disabled characters, or if we included more of this, that, and the other character. And I think that these things tend not to age well, but at the same time, I can understand that in 2005 it did not occur to the writers that this is a thing where they really ought to be including trans people. So it's like, are we looking at this as problematic in the sense that we look at it now and think, yeah, actually, with hindsight, that could have been better done, or problematic in the sense of, oh my God, you should have known better at the time?
Well, but the Stonewall was
And I feel this
1969. I don't think that's a good excuse.
oh yeah,
This has been an issue that's been percolating for a long time.
I can feel it a little bit like, the mainstream person in the United States is like really thick. Probably globally, it's just like not really absorbing stuff until it's like hammered over their head. So it's like if the issue wasn't out there very much, then like, maybe that's maybe it would slip somebody's mind. And this certainly wouldn't now. But with the other thing that she mentioned, Sarah mentioned disability. That's actually another issue in science fiction and fantasy, like gender. Well, HJ had a good point with what I was going to say that there would with regarding to people being trans, you would see people that are like a non-standard presentation, if people could do anything, and that's something that wasn't showing up there. But with a disability and with people that are binary trans people, they would get rid of that if they could, and with magic or science fiction, or they can. So how do you include the representation if a person basically flipped the make myself cis button, and they would become invisible? That's the author's excuse that they were using there. Same thing could apply in a fantasy setting where people have magic that could change their shape and stuff like that. So sometimes science fiction and fantasy could complicate, why would anybody need a wheelchair if they could have like a armature that would allow them to walk, right? Or just like some repair to their body that would like prevent that from being a problem for them.
Interesting, although you then do get the whole thing of neuroatypicality, where you've got people who actually are quite happy with being autistic and don't want to change it, and it's a fundamental part of who you are if you're autistic. And so what you actually need is better representation, and also showing how this is something that can be integrated into society, rather than just erasing it altogether. How are we doing for time? Oh, goodness, we're halfway through, which the good news is you will not have to listen to much more of this. The bad news, we need to get on and include other people's opinions. I've brought a few different things to talk about, so I think I'll intersperse them in between talking to other people. And here we go. Good old-fashioned one you might know as a child. how big are the Roald Dahl books over in the UK, in the USA
Huge.
rather?
They're really popular here.
Yes,
Yeah.
so you will know what I'm talking about. So Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the thing is, you read this as a child, it's this lovely, delightful, whimsical story of the poor boy who finds his way into heaven. He gets his golden ticket, he gets to look around the chocolate factory. It's this amazing, exciting place. You all remember reading this as a child and just discovering it, right? And the joy of it. So do you all remember the bit when you look back on it as an adult and think, hang on, why is Willy Wonka trafficking people from strange and foreign sounding countries where they happen to grow cocoa plants and not paying them proper wages to work for them in his factory, and as we find out in the subsequent book, doing terrible experiments on them? Willy Wonka is basically Dr. Mengele. So, yes, I find this book rather problematic in retrospect. And then also there's the issue with the fat phobia there with Augustus Gloop. There's also that. And probably some stuff I'm forgetting. So, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I present that to you as a case of a delightful children's book, which actually had some definite problems with it, looked at through the lens of hindsight.
Yes.
So,
And it also endorses child abuse, because what they did to those kids was pretty horrific.
yes,
Yeah.
it's also a sad comment on poverty in society, which actually that bit is horrendously realistic. The poor Charlie is basically starving to death because his family have no money, and he's not getting any kind of food help, assistance, or whatever, and nor are the four very elderly people who are being supported by his family. I mean, looking back on this, I think, no, how could such things be allowed to happen? And but yes, I hope that reality isn't quite that bad, and I fear it might be.
You've already forgotten Margaret Thatcher, huh?
Well, I was thinking more of the States. I think in the US we've had a bit more of a safety net, even in the Thatcher years. But yeah, I was young and very sheltered at the time. I might be wrong. Anyway, that's my first contribution. Can we move on to Peasy? What what thoughts do you have on problematic things do you like?
Yeah, there are a lot of them, because I was going to talk about science in general. And yeah, it's full of problematic issues, but we can go right back to the 19th century and look at Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin had some terrible views, especially about women. And it's like we all sweep them under the rug, and we want to think of Charles Darwin as this benign, saintly character who was brilliant, did all this great work. But then whenever you get digging into what he was his actual attitudes, he was racist and vaguely misogynist. So yeah, that's a problem. And then you look at all the people who followed on in science. I mean, one that really bugs me is Thomas Hunt Morgan, who, when I was going to school, was also brought up as pretty much a saint of science, who did all kinds of amazing things. And then the part where it broke for me was discovering the obituary he wrote for Nettie Stevens, which was appalling. And Nettie Stevens was working in Morgan's lab, and she's the one who came up with all these ideas about X and Y chromosomes and the inheritance of sex and all that kind of good stuff. She actually informed him about all of this in the lab. She discovered the Y chromosome in flies, lots of stuff like that. And then she died of breast cancer. And Thomas Hunt Morgan wrote her obituary, where he basically said, oh, she was a pretty good technician in the lab. Yeah. And the thing is too that here she was this smart woman who was doing great work, and turn of the century, early 20th century, if you were a woman, you could not get employed at a university except in some menial job. So she worked for years trying to get, the kind of basic professorship that every man going into the sciences at that time could expect to eventually land. And she was denied over and over again. She finally lands a position, and then immediately afterwards comes down with breast cancer. So yeah, lots of things about the way male scientists have behaved over the centuries is kind of appalling. And I've sort of come to the conclusion that I'm not going to trust any male scientist at all, not even here in the 21st century, because we still have the same problems. You're going to have to demonstrate to me that you are egalitarian and willing to make the kinds of sacrifices and give up some of your prestige in order to make room for other scientists to come up in the ranks. And that's a really rare thing to see.
And I think stories like that are useful and powerful to know about, partly so that we can give people the honour and respect they deserve, partly so that we've got more role models for, up and coming girls wanting to be scientists, and let's think here about other potential minority groups, black, other non-white people within science, role models who've been erased, whom we don't get to hear about. And also there's the fact, in the case of Darwin in particular, this is something I've seen Christian fundamentalists being delighted to turn against atheism or non-Christians, where this whole, well, Darwin is a racist, what do you expect? They're just, this is what evolution teaches you. It just teaches you about survival of the fittest, and it teaches you not to be a moral person. And I think it's actually entirely reasonable to separate out the science, which is excellent, from the views he held, which, from what you say, were quite appalling and not something we'd be happy with about at all, and say, we disagree with this, but it doesn't affect the evidence behind his science.
Yes, but just to complicate it just a little bit, complicate things on this matter, actually quite a bit maybe, is that, first of all, his science wasn't perfect. There were a lot of flaws to his ideas. We don't give enough attention to the fact that his ideas about inheritance and genetics were totally wrong, and they actually held back the progress of evolutionary biology for a number of decades. So, you got to recognize, yeah, he was really smart in these things, not so great in these other things. And part of the problem was his own need to be recognized as the smartest guy in the room, I think. Also, another problem is, if you read the literature on this kind of thing, over and over again, we hear Charles Darwin wasn't as bad as all the others, right? He was pretty open-minded. He was more sensitive to issues of race. He was slightly better about his attitude towards women, but that's not really an excuse now, is it? I mean, this was an era of the suffragettes and people and women struggling to get the vote and basic things like that. And people should be aware. Darwin should have known that this was a problem, and should have, again, it's not his science, though. It's his upbringing as a well-to-do Victorian gentleman. That's what inculcated all these attitudes in his head, not the science. And it's hard to separate that out.
Mm.
So,
So,
and then one last thing I'd add is, what are we going to do about it? This is the big problem, is if you make these criticisms about people like Darwin, then people start screaming, oh, you're trying to cancel Charles Darwin? How horrible. And suddenly you're made to be the bad guy because we're somehow going to cancel him. But no, we're not. That you can't erase Charles Darwin from history. He's so central to a lot of the science. But what we can do is try to have a more realistic perspective on his flaws and his strengths. And in the current political climate, that is treated as, a horrible affront to all of science, that you are trying to cancel the hero. Shouldn't have any heroes, that's for sure.
So perhaps we should be focusing more on ideas rather than on idolizing people.
Yes, I mean, there has been a general recognition that that's a problem. For instance, in medicine and genetics, there has been a trend away from the old habit of naming these new diseases or these new tissues after the guy who discovered it, because it puts the emphasis in exactly the wrong place. Do you look at modern genetics? No, we don't do that anymore. We avoid, a good example is Down syndrome. Should we really name this very common syndrome after this old 19th century doctor who was rather horrible in a lot of ways? I mean, just the fact that he first called this mongoloidism, right? There's issues there. And we can circumvent that by just recognizing, okay, it's trisomy 21. That's a nice neutral name for it.
On that line, there's also Asperger's syndrome, which I am no kind of expert in this. I am passing on what I've heard, so I'm open to correction. But apparently there are, I have heard concerns raised that Hans Asperger was in fact associated with the Nazis, and his reason for separating out the subset of autistic children whom he identified as having this syndrome was because they were the ones who he thought were potentially useful to society and weren't just going to be a useless drain on society who could be killed off. Now, again, stop me if I'm wrong. I have that through hearsay and I've not looked into it. And,
no, I've heard the same thing. Yeah,
and I'm wary about passing on things that have not been fact checked. But again, I've heard enough that I would be wary of using the term Asperger's syndrome without looking into it more carefully.
Yes, and there's multiple examples.
Asperger's syndrome is basically, and it's actually simpler than the Down syndrome thing, because Asperger's syndrome is just a form of autistic spectrum disorder, and let's just say autism. Anyway,
so similarly, though, I've had to deal with the fact that one of the seminal figures in developmental biology was Hans Spemann, who was most definitely a Nazi. He was a member of the Nazi Party. He was responsible for purging German universities of Jewish influence. Yet I have to talk about Spemann in class. So all I can do is make it pretty clear that, oh yeah, here's this guy, he was pretty horrible, but he discovered this principle that's kind of important in developmental biology. Warts and all, that's what you gotta do. Tell them everything about this stuff.
And on those very general lines, there's also the issues of the rather a different one, but the physical atlases, the anatomy atlases produced by the Nazis after some rather nasty human experiments. giving this kind of moral dilemma that you have these, I am told, very good quality anatomy atlases produced by absolutely horrendous means, by absolutely horrendous people. What do you do about that? What do you do about data produced by the worst of their experiments? I mean, these are like ethical issues I've heard about in medical school and seen written about in the British Medical Journal since, and it's one of life's dilemmas that you have to, how much use can you ethically get out of this ethical horror?
Right. And is it an ethical horror if you take all this information and throw it away because it was obtained unethically? I don't know.
The argument that is made is that the argument that is made counter to that is that you can at least get something useful out of this from the dreadful things that have happened. I mean, one of the things I've thought about, although I don't think anyone's done it, is if you're accessing the anatomy atlases, should you only be allowed to do it if you're making a donation to a human rights organization or a Jewish rights organization, or something combating anti-Semitism or something like that, something to counteract any use you get from the things that had to happen to bring this information for anyone to be able to use it.
Yeah, and we know somebody is profiting off of that right now. The publishers of those medical atlases, what are they doing with the profits they get from this work?
I don't know. I believe this is actually available on the internet, and I can't remember what actually is happening in terms of, is anybody profiting from them? I think they're now available without profit, but there are questions over should people just be able to log on and access them or whatever. Sorry, I hadn't thought about this for some time and didn't think about it until you brought associated subjects up, and had I thought of it, I'd have looked up the old BMJ article and tried to get some background on it. Anyway, time is moving on. Let's see. My next example that I brought is actually so frivolous it's a bit embarrassing to go straight from talk of Nazi torture into this one. So you know what, I'm going to move over to Great American Satan and see, do you have any thoughts on problematic favorites?
Okay, so if we had more than an hour, this is a subject that's got a bunch of different axes to it. I hadn't even begun to think that somebody might bring up a subject, something as tame as this represents itself as hard sci-fi, but it's actually soft, as being problematic. That was like kind of surprising to me. I'm coming in here thinking that we're talking about like, well, okay, there's the art, there's the artist, there's whether or not you can separate the art from the artist, there's profit, there's like doing stuff that doesn't involve profit. There's like a lot of different dimensions to this subject that we don't have time to get into. So anyway, that's just funny coming from that, and I'm thinking about like, okay, then it's like what's the line between like canceling and censorship and stuff like that? Is there room for problematic art? And should things that are sufficiently bad just be like sequestered in some toxic waste dump and not exposed to broader humanity? There's that guy in Florida that got literally sent to prison and forbidden from drawing because he made a comic book that was so offensive to people. That's something that happened in the United States. His controversial comic that got him sent to prison was Boiled Angel. I don't really know much about the subject matter, but we can safely presume it was pretty offensive. There's a there's a whole subset of content in Japan There's, well, of course, there's stuff that's specifically meant to be erotic that is incredibly vile and transgressive over there. But there's also stuff that's kind of on the line because it gets more artistic. And that's getting to their what they call ero-guro for erotic grotesque. There's some intercultural exchange between France and Japan on that stuff. Famous Japanese writer from the early 20th century named Edogawa Ranpo, who named himself after Edgar Allan Poe, had some very famous stories that were the kind of thing that would definitely get him thrown in prison in the United States, although they were a little more tame than some of the more literal adaptations of them that have followed. What do I want to say? Yeah, there's a whole world out there of very transgressive art, and we haven't even touched that. And then there's the idea of, like, people art that's totally tame and normal and generic or whatever, and is just made by people who do bad shit or are bad people in various ways, right? Like the obvious one of the moment, the spearhead of global fascism coming from the children's literature section. Yeah, I just I don't know. Yeah, so anyways, it's a really huge subject that you could just, like, this could go a lot deeper than we can, really. Kind of the main thing. High speed tour, I don't know if any of that made sense. Oh, so do I have a problematic fave though? Like the short version of that. I don't know that I really have faves. I don't interface with the art that I consume in that way. I have some stuff that I like that but I don't, like, hold it up on without, like, being constant awareness of its flaws. The main one that comes to mind today was the Misfits and the music of Glenn Danzig. Glenn Danzig recently said something like, "Oh, these days you couldn't even make music like I used to make. It just wouldn't even be allowed to happen or whatever." It's like, well, who would have stopped you, Glenn? But there's yeah, I mean, like, I got a lot of enjoyment out of the Misfits when I was like in my early 20s, jamming with my friends in the suburban apartment complex. I'd be belting out the lyrics of Last Caress. At this point in my life, with my perspective now, I could be like, my neighbors reasonably could have made an argument that I was sexually harassing them by doing that. So and the lyrics for Teenagers from Mars, I don't know if you know that track, just like, did that ever have to be written, Glenn, really? So it's just kind of funny. But yeah, I'm just, I'll listen to the album. I'll probably skip Teenagers from Mars. And just just be aware, right? And probably don't give money to people that are actively doing bad stuff with it right now. At least, like, on the scale of JK or whatever. And that's the main stuff. Yep.
Yeah, but where do we draw the line? I mean, what's problematic for one person may not be problematic for someone else. There are people who enjoy that Japanese erotic gore.
There's the arty end of it particularly is, like, really hard to deny the beauty of it. There's this author that, if you feel like you got a high tolerance for being offended, stuff that'll just make you, like, wish you weren't seeing this, Suehiro Maruo is one of the most respected artistic manga creators in Japan, and he's got this series called Laughing Vampire. It's just got stuff in it that would just get him sent straight to prison in the United States, right? And Hecubus, come on, man, come on, hey.
Your cat is on the ceiling? Oh, man.
That did look interestingly as though you were trying to summon a demon.
I might have. Okay, and then, oh yeah, and then, like, there's the Mark Twain quote, which I'm really surprised no one's brought up yet. Was it Mark Twain? It's like, you can't, censorship is telling you, a man, he can't eat steak because a baby can't chew it. Right?
I hadn't
You know
heard
the
that
one?
one. No, good
So
quote.
anyways, the idea there is that like is maybe it's like a matter of venue, which I think matters a lot. It's like when I'm like yelling like I killed a baby today and like raped your mom and stuff like that in my small suburban neighborhood, then my neighbors could be like, man, I don't need to hear that shit.
Hmm.
But if I'm doing that in my headphones, who cares? And like if you buy the Suihiro Maruo comic in a brown paper bag from a dirty store and bring it home, like that should be legitimate and legal and fine, right? So I don't think anybody reasonable is suggesting that you shouldn't be allowed to that you know Maplethorpe shouldn't have been able to have a career or whatever,
Yeah.
right?
Although I'm curious about one thing you said, which is you started to make a distinction based on the quality of the work. Is that reasonable? Are we,
Yes.
yeah, so is somebody who's a no talent hack but is doing weird stuff in manga, should we just judge them on the basis of how good they are, how well trained they are?
There you can get a certain amount of intent out of the subject matter, right? So
Uh-huh.
if you watch a sex scene in a movie, that's like you can tell when you're watching it. And again, I'm not don't want to be like the I know but when I see it styled argument about porn.
Right.
But you can tell when it's being made specifically to help somebody achieve orgasm because it has a kind of rhythm to it, right? Um, that you wouldn't see if somebody's just making it to like really captivate your intellect. And I'd say that would be the difference you could see between Maruo and people that would still be labeled as Eroguro, but were more explicitly just pornography.
Right.
And I don't think that the people that are doing the pornography should be forbidden either. Like I said, get it in a brown paper bag, keep it away from the kids or whatever. But
And
it's
don't hurt people while you're making it is
don't
another
hurt people
important
while
thing.
you're making it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there
Um,
is a whole huge problem with ethics within the porn industry and
Yeah.
the way that sex workers within it are treated. So there's that. How do you avoid supporting that industry, supporting that treatment of people? If you want to be someone who uses porn within the society. Which is an excellent argument. And since my mother said she wants to watch this podcast when I've finished it, I think perhaps I will not get too much into discussing the whys and wherefores of porn. Yeah, that just got problematic in a whole different way right there. Um, so I think we're running a bit short of time, and I do want to come back to the point PZ raised about, how do we deal with the issue of what we do and don't spend money on, and what to do about the fact of problematic things being out there, and that obviously deserves a lot more debate than we can give it just in the few minutes before the end. But I mean, there's refusing to spend money on someone's work because you don't like their views. There's the whole thorny question of whether you censor something, and at what point you draw the line there. There seem to me to be a whole lot of issues raised there, so I don't know whether anyone has any thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, it is definitely a tricky subject. We can say that. And actually, we also haven't even sort of gotten into authorial intent, like Fight Club, for instance. It's supposed to be sort of a skewering of the specific man-baby theme of, of entitlement and all that. And yet so many people actually take it the opposite way to be like, oh, this is cool. We're going to emulate this sort of thing. And that really sort of complicates anything you would actually do to sort of limit the scope of this, because the problem with it isn't actually with the work itself. Chuck Palahniuk's, themes were actually A-okay for critiquing consumerism, masculinity, and all that. No problems there. It was the interpretation that was wrong. And now, how exactly are we going to work around, stopping that? I mean, the obvious way is to just, okay, well, we're going to educate people and all that. Well, there's limits to education. And, it's very easy to sort of counter-educate or radicalize people, if you prefer. So it's a very hard problem right there. And I think I just made things even a little bit worse there. So, oops.
Yeah. Well, so another example would be the Bible. What do we do about that? Because people sure are interpreting it in strange and horrible ways.
There's a British band that did a song about that called "Should the Bible Be Banned?" A band called McCarthy. I don't know if Sarah's heard of that.
Did they get banned? The band, that
Did
is?
McCarthy get banned? I don't know. They were pretty communistical and had a song about killing,
Oh.
executing Charles Windsor. So probably didn't get a lot of radio play.
They should have played it for the coronation.
Well, there you go. There's still
By the way, that
time.
is an excellent song.
Yeah, that is the whole thing about the Bible and whether that should be banned because of the influence it's had on people is, of course, an excellent example. And then, of course, there are all the things that are in the Bible that you might not want your child reading necessarily. What sort of restrictions do you put on people there? So again, once again, we've managed to raise a lot of interesting questions when we're getting into the final minutes of the podcast. There you go, yet another reason I shouldn't be hosting this again. I clearly have not planned any of this very well.
You've been doing fine. It's all good.
I've just been totally winging it.
Yeah.
So, let's see. We seem to be down to the last few minutes. Are we ending it? We started a few minutes late. Are we going to end a few minutes after 11 to balance things out, or what?
That's up to you. You're the host, so you can choose where to end things where you wish.
Yeah.
Maybe
Maybe what we should do is end by going around and telling everybody where to go to ask more questions and get more tentative answers.
That's the thing. I don't think there's any sort of one place that you can go to or particularly I mean, I don't know. Have you got any good ideas on where you go?
Well, yes, I
You've
think
got
everybody
questions
should
and
go to your blog to complain about your maltreatment of poor Roald Dahl and make excuses for him that you'll then
yeah.
have to respond to.
Oh God, no.
Well, everyone, my blog once again is freethoughtblogs.com/geekyhumanists. So come along and pepper my posts with comments on Roald Dahl and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's all her fault. Go deal with her. That's what we say.
There
is a one relevant Tumblr. It's called your fave is problematic.tumblr.com. I can't vouch for it, but or even say whether or not it's updating, but it's pretty directly on topic.
Well, the title is promising.
Yeah, I suspect if you just Google problematic, you will get more resources than you can handle.
Yeah, Papa, I feel that might not be the most useful way to go about it.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Going back to the misinterpretation of the original topic, does anyone want to comment on the issue of favourite children?
No.
All of my
for one thing, I
children
don't
are my
have children,
favorites.
so.
Yeah, people are wisely steering clear of that one.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think let's see if anyone's got any closing statements they want to make to wind the whole thing up. Satan, what have you got to say on the matter?
So, not a breeder, but my brother has adopted some girls. And I would say of those, Viverka is my favorite. And that's all there is to it. Sorry, Laura, that's like, you're gonna have to try harder, maybe grow up a little bit more, and stop causing random acts of destruction as much. Yeah,
this
you got some
wouldn't
stiff
be a
competition.
toddler by any chance, or yeah, but I think my favourite child is automatically anyone who isn't a toddler. Yes, anyway, sorry, I actually meant, did you have any last words of wisdom on the topic of problematic faves in terms of media consumption, the things we like?
Yeah, don't I don't know if this gets said often enough. It does get said pretty often. Don't even do fan art of J.K. Rowling stuff. Just don't. It's all commercials for her, which gives her money ultimate indirectly. Don't do fanfic anymore. Don't do fan art. Don't. If you do that stuff, trade it in private where nobody's gonna see it, like back channels, like brown paper bags. Like it's like it's contraband, baby. Just don't do it. There's so much other stuff out there you could go in for now that was inspired directly by it, but isn't created by her and doesn't fund global fascism. So just be done with it, man. Just stop.
And in
Yeah,
particular,
and I
she's
would
been
think
very
I've
open. Oh, sorry, she's been very open that all the profits she sees are reinforcing her worldview. I.e., if people keep buying Harry Potter books,
yeah.
that validates her transphobic views. She's been very open and honest about that. So it's not just a matter of somebody who's problematic and for other reasons. It's like, no, she's very explicitly saying if you support her work, you are validating her worldview.
Yeah.
Do
And I was
we
just going
really
to
want?
add that another factor is there are some people who are writing basically harassing, horrible art about J.K. Rowling. Don't do that either. I mean, all it's going to do is discredit our side and make her richer again.
I'm having asked for final statements, going to have to disagree. The other day, I was reading some truly beautiful fan fiction written based on the Harry Potter world. A heck of an improvement on the real thing, to be honest. And my child who was sitting next to me commented on this, and I said, well, the the problems with the views that J.K. Rowling herself has presented don't change the beauty of what other people have managed to write and create based on those ideas. So my question, and I have my own answer to it, which is different from yours, is do we have to reject the good that's come out of it in terms of some potentially beautiful fanfic or various other beautiful things because of the problems partly within the work itself, let us be aware, but also very much with the views of the author. To what extent do we want to go for a kind of ideological purity? To what extent is that even something we can feasibly do, given that if we don't consume J.K. Rowling's work, which neither one of them fine with no longer doing, what happens when the next person and the next and the next turns out to have some idea we don't like, and where do we draw the line? I mean, J.K. Rowling has been particularly harmful because she has got this massive fan base and massive voice and has coupled it with an equally massive refusal to actually find out both sides of what she is talking
Oh,
about
well,
and find out the hideous inaccuracies in the things she's saying, and she's particularly problematic for that reason. I'm not saying otherwise. I would not have I don't feel I want to wave aside every bit of fan art or inspiration that's occurred as a
yeah.
result of that.
So I mean, okay. So this is what I was saying though. Is it like she like established a sort of young adult fantasy milieu that or children's fantasy milieu that like a lot of people have been working in without directly referencing that work. Like people that were inspired by those went on to become fantasy authors that are doing original content. So at this, does something actually have to be fan work or and reference the original in any way, shape, or form to bring some kind of inspiration out of it that would be of use? No, and any kind of fan work that's being like promoted right now is a commercial for her. Basically, it's saying like even if it's totally disagreeing with her views, inverting everything, saying like oh we're gonna make trans characters and stuff like that. It's just working in her milieu is advertising her materials, which gives her money. So it's like, yeah, there's not necessarily money changing hands directly, but just making it's continuing the cultural relevance of it in a way that just doesn't need to happen. And it's because of the way she's conducted herself geopolitically, the way like literally like Putin was like name dropping her in his agenda. It's just like it's so like next level compared to the other people out there that are messed up jerks. She's like really like gone way beyond the usual considerations. I think that literally at this point, like, don't even put the fan fiction out there. Or if you do, if you like and just feel like that's so core to your identity that you absolutely have to do it in some kind of private milieu rather than on AO3 or whatever, right? That's my feeling on it.
And keep in mind that if you're writing Harry Potter fanfic, you might attract some of the wrong people to read your stuff. It's going to be popular with people who are sympathetic to J.K. Rowling and her world. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to draw in that kind of appeal.
If Nazis love your stuff, maybe you should
Sounds like a
question
good
why
opportunity to
Nazis
read
love
to
it.
the audience. You might want to. Sorry, HJ, what was that?
Oh, sorry. If Nazis love your work, you might want to question why they love your work.
If you
Right.
gotta, there's Trans Wizard Harriet Porter by Chuck Tingle.
Yes.
Take a look.
Okay,
Good
that
choice, good
sounds good. Any other last words from anybody?
Well, we should probably do a round of like social medias, things, and all that. So I don't know. I guess I'll go. Okay, I'm Reprobate Spreadsheet, freethoughtblog/reprobate, if you are so inclined. I post a blog post once every few months or so, approximately. Although I am overdue for another one, so expect it to come within the next few weeks. So. I'm also in charge of
Okay.
our Mastodon instance, Free Thought Online, and you can actually directly interact with me there. Sorry, PZ, I was stomping on your lines there.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah. So yeah, I'm PZ Myers. I have a blog on Free Thought Blogs at Furingilla. I picked the worst possible name because nobody knows how to spell it. But you can find me there pretty regularly. I post a little more often than HJ, but that's easy to do.
Very.
Clayton?
Yeah. I'm pretty erratic. Sometimes I post frequently. Sometimes I post like it'll be more than a month between. freethoughtblogs.com/gas for Great American Satan. I'm running a fundraiser right now because I'm taking a little time off work for surgery, and I'm not getting compensated for that time. So if you want to check that out, I mean, I'm linking to it in all my most recent posts. And I think that's about it.
And I'm Sarah. I post as Dr. Sarah, and my blog is Geeky Humanist, and I post snarky book reviews, which unexpectedly brings us round to the topic, since what I like to do is point out the problematic things in books, and also sometimes often the terrible writing in them. So my posting schedule is also fairly erratic, and I haven't posted for a while, but I'm hoping to make up for that soon. So come and check that out. Complaints about my comments on Roald Dahl quite optional. Okay, and I think that's everything. Have a lovely rest of the day or night wherever you are, everyone, and enjoy your weekend. And I think that's us out. Goodbye, everyone.